Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to The Black Tower Show. I'm your host, Nathan Ford. We're broadcasting 1310 WRSB, 1590 WASB, upstate New York, Brockport, Canandaigua, Rochester. It's a little rainy outside, but inside we got work to do. We got things we have to talk about. If you turn on the TV, everybody's watching. It's a world war that we're heading into. Let's weed it out. Let's figure it out with Ray McGovern, our guest again. The distinguished Ray McGovern, retired CIA officer, political activist. McGovern was a federal employee under 7 U.S. presidents over 27 years. Ray McGovern, he's in it. He's been there. He knows what's going on. Listen to him. Ray McGovern. Go to raymcgovern.com. raymcgovern.com, our distinguished guest on the Black Tower Show. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, Nathan. Much better than usual.
Great. Let's break this down, what's going on in Syria. People are tuning in. It's getting hot. It's getting heavy. If you go to raymcgovern.com, you got the broader stakes of the Syrian crisis article on your website. Or it's about Iran, stupid. Let's break this down. What's really going on?
Also, we also have to interject here. We have some breaking news here regarding the situation. President Obama has decided to get approval from Congress before he does strikes with Iran. Congress doesn't convene again until September 9th, though, so strikes are at least a week or more away. So I'd like to interject that little bit of good news.
That's why I'm feeling a lot better than usual. I just got back from the White House. Now, I'm no longer briefing the president in the White House. Mostly I'm demonstrating in front of the White House, and I made a little speech. And the speech said, by virtue of our being there, and if you listen to his speech, you could hear us. You could hear us in the background. We were shouting way on the other side of the White House from the Rose Garden, and he delayed his entry into the to the podium until they fixed their own blocking sound devices so they couldn't hear us so badly. Now that's accidental. What happened here? Well, it was not only us. It was the British people. It was the people in every other city and town in this country who demonstrated against yet another feckless, unnecessary, unjust war. And Obama blinked. Now, as of just yesterday, it looked very much as though, and we know that the military forces were deployed, it looked as though Obama was going to fire cruise missiles at maybe 50 of them at Syria before he leaves on Tuesday to go out to Russia, actually, eventually to attend the G20 summit. So he wanted to, show his muscle, show what a tough guy he is, get that done, and then go to confer with these 19 other leaders. Well, it didn't work out that way. You know why? Because a lot of us, including, and this is important, including the top military officers of our country, refused to carry out an illegal order. And we know that because, well, I can't tell you exactly how we know that, but there are people at the top of our military who still believe that the Constitution of the United States is what they swore to support and defend when they were commissioned as Army officers. I had the same promise and the same oath when I was commissioned way back in 1961. Now, for those on active duty, that's obviously operative. For those like me who are retired, well, you know what? That sacred oath to the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, has no expiration date. And that's why Veterans for Peace was out en masse in front of the White House today and many other cities saying, look, we know what the war is like, Barack Obama. You don't. You don't have a prayer. And we're supporting the top military of our country who have finally stood up and said, Mr. President, if you order us to make a war without the appropriate congressional resolution under Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution, we're not going to be war criminals. So what's the effect of all this? The effect of all this is the president blinked. And today he said, well, we still have to make war, we still have to do all this stuff, but we're going to seek congressional authorization. And that's the biggie. Will he persuade the Congress based on that fairy tale he told yesterday, or he had his Secretary of Defense, State tell yesterday about all these terrible weapons? Is he going to persuade enough of the Congress, despite those of us who know what the story is, to approve yet another war where lots of people who don't look like us? That's what I said. What people don't realize, 3 days ago, we're all on the mall, right? We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous address. Okay, he talked famously, many times about the dangers of racism, militarism, and poverty. Now, I addressed the racism, and I only had a few minutes. And I said, look, do you think for a moment that if the people in Syria didn't look so different from us, didn't wear what we consider to be unusual things on their head, do you think that would be as easy to send cruise missiles there? You take Senator Lindsey Graham from the great state of South Carolina, right? Let's say there was an incident, some kind of gas incident in Charleston, South Carolina, okay? Now, would he be as willing to have the president send cruise missiles into that historic city of 3 centuries old and kill a whole bunch of white people? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. Now, in Damascus, we're talking about a country that's not 3 centuries old. It's 3 millennia old. But you know what? They don't look like us. And that's the key, because far too many Americans are still guilty of what Dr. King called the sin of racism. It's the original sin of our country. No matter how many times we're baptized, that original sin is not eradicated. The sooner we face up to that, the better. And I do hope that our black and our brown and our white brothers and sisters will be storming Congress saying, look, not again, not in our name, will you make war on people largely because it's so easy, because they don't look like us.
We're speaking to Ray McGovern on the Black Tower Show.
Last thing here is, if I've read Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham City Jail once, I've read it 18 times, okay? Do you remember the little poignant excerpt where he says, my daughter came up to me and she said, why can't I go to this amusement park or so-and-so? And he said, just because you're black. And she said, Daddy, why do white people hate black people so much? Now, I would suggest that anybody who has $1 million salary and who is part of the system here, like Barack Obama, like Eric Holder, like the other people who do the administration's bidding, well, they're the same as the white people that little daughter of Dr. King was asking about. And so the question now is, why do white people and those who become what Cornel West called the white people's mascot, why do these people be so mean to other people who don't look like us? That's the key now. That's what we have to really address, fess up to, and get out in the street and make sure people hear our voice.
Wise words.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead, Nathan. Sorry.
No, we're speaking to Ray McGovern. Ray McGovern, retired CIA officer turned political activist. Wise words from McGovern. We're fans of Cornel West. We believe that one of the tragedies that's happening here in America is that we're attacking each other. We're going after. If you turn on the Fox News channel, you're going to hear a lot about welfare mothers and black and brown people feeding off the system, and that's what's destroying America. That is the problem. We're blaming the victim, and a lot of that's happening. That seems to be a common theme throughout it all, and it's something that we need to address.
I would say that I agree with you that that's not the problem at all. The problem is when he was doing that little show yesterday, as McGovern said, the report, quote, proving Assad's use of chemical weapons. It's based on YouTube clips. And this is actually in the official U.S. statement. We assess the Syrian opposition does not have the capability to fabricate all of the videos. This is the rationale for going to war against, the oldest civilization on Earth. This is incredible.
Yeah, I have a little experience, like 30 years worth in intelligence work. And I've read that statement yesterday, which is supposed to be the, quote, evidence, end quote, on all this. And what struck me most was that there's nothing tangible there. There are no names. There are no specific words from specific intercepted messages. What it lacks is specificity, okay? Now, I was thinking back to earlier days when Ronald Reagan was president. Now, Ronald Reagan, even though I served him faithfully, he was no hero of mine. And so when he blamed Libya for a terrorist attack on a disco where 5 or 6 U.S. soldiers were killed in Berlin, okay? Hundreds were injured, but 5 or 6 U.S. soldiers, as I recall, killed. When he blamed Libya for that, I said, oh, God, for God's sake, what a stretch that is. And then I saw the evidence, okay? And it was, it was airtight. And so the rest of the world was reluctant, just as I had been, and I was working there at the time, working at CIA, was reluctant to believe Ronald Reagan. And what did he do? I have no defense for what he did. He bombed the hell out of Gaddafi's palace, killed one of his grandchildren. It was just merciless what he did. And so I'm saying, wow, that's an overreaction, but at least he's not lying about who did it. Now, the reaction around the world and in this country was so strong. There was so much willingness not to believe Ronald Reagan that he went to us in the CIA and he said, look, I think we owe it to the American people to release that intercepted message, because only then are they going to believe that we had the goods on Gaddafi, that he ordered this massacre of people at that Berlin disco. And of course, all my friends said, no, you can't do that. No, then the Libyans will find out that we have the capability to monitor their messages and even to decode them. No, you can't do that. And Ronald Reagan, to his credit, said, do it. And so they did. Okay? Now, what do I raise that? I raise that because we did lose an important source and method. Okay? That's not to say we couldn't make up for it from other means, but we lost an important capability to monitor Libyan traffic messages. Now, Obama, quite differently from what's his name here, Reagan, has decided, no, trust us, trust us. Now, I mean, pardon me for laughing. Trust us? Trust us when the National Intelligence Director lied by his own admission to Congress on a very important matter, namely, are we eavesdropping on millions of Americans' telephone calls? He said, no, sir. The answer, correct, was yes, sir. And he explained later, months later, by saying, well, I told the, quote, the least untrue thing, end quote. Well, the least untrue thing? Is that what we expect from the head of intelligence in this country? So that's the kind of people that he's worked with. John Brennan, the head of the CIA, my God, I wouldn't trust him to walk my dog. The guy is, 2 years ago, he stood up before the press and he said, I'm here to tell you, you people who don't like drone strikes that we're running, we the CIA in Pakistan, I'm here to tell you that over almost a complete year before this, there has been not one civilian casualty. God, they laughed him out of the room. There were hundreds of civilian casualties. Mm-hmm. So these are the people he's relying on. I think it's an act of extreme arrogance or hubris to on the president's part to say, well, trust us. Our intelligence community has come up with all this analysis. What he needs is what Ronald Reagan did. This is what Obama needs to do, and that is give us something we can check out. Last thing I'll say on this is that Colin Powell, when he went before the UN and gave that deceptive speech about the need to attack Iraq, well, he used some intercepted messages from the National Security Agency, and he embroidered on them. He sort of falsified them. He made them look much more dangerous than they actually were. But the State Department later put them up on its website, and so you could check them. And so you could go back to Colin Powell and say, Colin Powell, why did you distort that message? Why did you make it look like there were weapons of mass destruction there when there was no indication from the message itself? We have the text now, Colin. Why did you do that? What I'm saying is this. If you say specifics, they can come back to bite you if you're lying. And I think we're probably lying here, and that's why we ain't got no specifics, pardon my Bronx language.
And people think that this is a war of morality, that we're there to take out this evil empire. And like you said, those people over there, they're different. They look different. And so it's okay. And we've become kind of accustomed to this. The American people feel, in many ways, okay about it. Even though, I mean, most people in America would say that we shouldn't be in Syria. And there is kind of this, this idea that we're weary of all of the war that's going on.
Yeah, Nathan, you're quite right about that, and it's a really important point. So the question arises, how come? How can Americans be so distant from all this stuff? Now, one main reason is what's happened to the media since Vietnam. I was first working in our intelligence community. The media was independent. They would print things that showed government lying. They printed the Pentagon Papers. That was an independent media. And I just passed 50 years from the time I arrived in Washington as an officer in the United States Army. And in 50 years, you see a lot of change. But there's one change that dwarfs all the other changes I've seen in importance. And that change is simply this, that we no longer have, in any real sense, a free media. And that's big. So that's one reason why the Americans can be sort of hermetically sealed from the suffering that we inflict on other countries. And this goes hand in hand with it. I remember a Jesuit priest who was head of the Jesuit order back 20 years ago. He made a really important statement, and it was in the wake of what happened in El Salvador, where the Jesuits who were preaching justice got killed. He said, personal experience with innocent human suffering is what's needed to catalyze thinking and to catalyze eventual action. In other words, if you have no personal experience with people suffering innocent outrages, such as the one, and there's a world of difference from intellectually reading somewhere in the newspaper that, 40 people killed at Baghdad yesterday. Oh, well, what's wrong with it? Well, if you're there and you see it, there's a world of difference. And only that, really, unless you're an extraordinary person, only that can catalyze you to do something about it. And, of course, that's what we need. So more people need to learn how to navigate the web, the Internet, and once that happens, then we'll have a fifth estate. The fourth estate is dead, the fourth estate being the media. Fifth estate is in the ether. It can't be so easily controlled. And when we have Assange and we have Bradley Manning and now Edward Snowden, I have more hope now, and particularly as a result of my 3 hours before the White House and the president's speech, I have more hope that we can turn this thing around. How the president backed off now on attacking Syria.
Sure. Yeah, I think it was Thomas Paine who said, "Democracy depends on an uncritical press granting anonymity to saber-rattling senior officials."
Yeah, and Thomas Jefferson, he was asked one time, and this really stuck in my craw. He was asked, "Mr. Jefferson, if you had a choice between having a government and having a free press, so which would you choose?" Jefferson didn't bat an eye. Oh, free press, of course. The governments will never be controlled. unless you have a free press. Free press is much more important than government. And he was not. This wasn't a new idea. The very expression, the fourth estate, okay, which means in Jefferson's day, of course, it meant the media, it meant the press. Now it means everything. Or the fourth estate was coined by Edmund Burke, the British statesman of the 18th century, who stood up in Parliament. And he said, now, I feel very privileged and very honored to be part of one of these three estates. Now, you have to realize that there were two houses of Commons in those days and one of Lords. So he's talking about Commons and Lords. He says, I'm privileged to be part of one of these three estates, but, and he pointed to the balcony, and he said, by far more important are the gentlemen, and unfortunately in those days it was all gentlemen, it was all men anyway, whether gentlemen or not. Okay, he looked up there and he said, you people in the balcony, you are members of the fourth estate, and you are far more important than all of us three estates put together, because it is only you who hold us accountable and preserve our democracy. So that was the fourth estate. That's why, we treasured the fourth estate, and that now it's so controlled by the same corporations that profiteer on these wars. Not profiteer on these wars. These same corporations that are sort of allied with the government and take a menu from the government every morning as to what they should address or what they should say about it. So the fourth estate is dead, but the fifth estate is very much alive. We know what's going on in terms of this conversation being recorded, stored away in some warehouse in Utah, and brought up next time they want to say something about McGovern or Nathan. And so we know about that, and the only way we know about that, of course, is through Edward Snowden and his patriotic divulging of information that shows that our constitutional rights have been played very loose with on the part of Obama as well as Bush.
I'd like to get your take on, it appears Turkey is really kind of imposing itself into this situation. The Syrian ambassador to the United Nations said Turkey, Saudi, and Qatar provided chemical weapons to the rebels and are behind the attacks. Turkey's Erdogan said that limited strikes won't be enough for them, and this is a direct quote, it needs to be enough to topple the regime. So, I mean, what do you think about Turkey's influence in the area? They've been really ramping up their influence in the area with the Israel conflict that they had in this situation. They've been really imposing themselves regionally.
Yeah, Erdogan, of course, is feeling his oats here, but you have to realize that the Turks have this special problem, and it's called the Kurds. Now, the Kurds are people who have had an incredibly sad history. They've been pawns of Henry Kissinger. They've been pawns of Saddam Hussein. They inhabit a large part of Turkey, of Syria, and Iraq. And they want their freedom. They want their independent state. There are millions of them. This is not a negligible tribe. These are very highly educated, many of them, people who have certain rights as a nation. And for the Kurds to be given perhaps overblown hopes that they can achieve some sort of autonomy in Syria, right across the border from Turkey, well, that's something that the Turks have to look on, or don't have to, but they do look on with great suspicion and with great feeling of danger. So that's one of the things that's rolling around in Erdogan's head. Now, I don't know what he thinks will happen if Assad goes. I do know that he's probably got a better guess than I do. But in any case, the country with the most hand in what happens will be Turkey. And so if he thinks he can influence events in a way that will eliminate or damp down his Kurdish problem and allow Turkey to exert still more influence in Syria, I suppose that then he would want Assad out. But, on that one point, Assad, He's a bad guy. I mean, there's no question about that. And he nipped the Syrian Spring in the bud. But then it went violent, okay? Then the rebels came in. And soon thereafter, what happens? But Hillary Clinton gets up, and she says, Assad has to go. Assad is finished. We're not going to deal with Assad. He's got to go, okay? Now, once you say something like that, you should have thought through the consequences. It's sort of like, our pushing for unconditional surrender in World War II. We didn't have to do that. There are lots of German military and others that are willing to fix things so that we could have a more peaceful end to the war. We didn't have to do that, but once we did do it, then there was no chance that Hitler wouldn't fight to the last person, okay? So, too, with Syria. Once we say Assad's got to go, what happens? Well, every rebel worth his salt organizes a group of ragtag people with automatic weapons, and they say, oh, hey, Assad's going to go? Let's get in on what's left once he goes. And so you create a situation where if Assad's got to go, the bets are off for everybody else. And not only that, but if the U.S. says it, it's going to happen. Now, it didn't happen. It's not happening now. And you would think that instead of repeating this stupid, and I think that's the right adjective, approach to things, that Obama would come back and say, well, Hillary Clinton is a real strong person, but I don't think she was right about this. I think we need to go to Geneva, and it's okay. Assad, sure, Assad can come and his folks, and every stakeholder in that area, including Iran, including Russia, including China, because they have big stakes in oil in that region, we all go to Geneva. Okay? Now, they tried that. And what happened? These guys that think they can depose Assad and get control of Syria, they refused to go. They said, we're not going. Thanks very much. So what happened? Well, the U.S. and the West, who are arming these guys, didn't grab them by the scruff of the neck as they should have and said, look, you come to Geneva or you get not so much as one more pistol, much less a grenade launcher. Then they would have gone to Geneva. But you know what? There are other interests in that part of the world that see the seething in Syria as being to their advantage. What the U.S. did with respect to Iraq has set off a civil war between Sunni and Shia that was entirely predictable. Some days over the last few weeks, almost 100 people were killed in terrorist attacks. Almost 100. Okay, that's as bad as it was 6 years ago when we were still there. Now, what does that translate into Syria? The same thing is going on in Syria. The Alawites that Assad leads are a Sunni brand of Islam, and they're in the minority. Did I say Sunni? I meant Shia. And the Sunnis, which are led by Al-Qaeda and others, they're in the majority, and they're fighting a confessional war, which is a reflection of the Sunni versus Shia conflict throughout that region. Now, the question is, cui bono? Who profits from all this? Well, I won't tell you the answer, but I'll give you the initials, okay? ISRAEL. And it is not by accident that Israel sitting back, watching what's going on, and saying to itself, well, as long as these Muslims keep fighting one another, we have nothing to lose out of that. So let's do what we can to encourage people who won't stop fighting, and so they're kind of profiting from all this and riding pretty high, given what happened in Egypt when the people they support, namely the Egyptian military, has emerged now as in charge of the country.
Andrea Mitchell was reporting a few days ago that U.S. solo attack without allies on Syria was scheduled for Sunday, which was the 74th anniversary of World War II, the symbolism of which was not lost upon me, I mean, considering the possible ramifications of a war like this. What made Obama blink?
We did. A lot of us, and I'm not saying just veteran intelligence professionals for sanity, which wrote a stinging letter to General Dempsey yesterday telling him, look, in effect, if you obey an illegal order to start a war, that puts you in the same category as the Nazi generals who knew they were obeying illegal orders. Illegal not only in the international sense. I mean, the only way you can start a war is if you're being threatened with imminent danger or you've already been attacked. Otherwise, you have to go to the Security Council to get approval. Okay, that's what we did after World War II to prevent the kinds of things that are going on now. So he said, General Dempsey, you have already said, and we quote, this kind of action would be an act of war, end quote. Okay, General Dempsey, Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution reserves to Congress, as the representatives of the American people, the sole right to declare or authorize with funding war. The President is about to launch a war without that congressional authorization. What are you going to do? Are you going to, like the Germans, we was just following orders? We just go to follow the orders? No. You're obliged to obey the common oath, the solemn oath that we all swore, to preserve and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, I know that letter reached General Dempsey. What I don't know is whether it pricked his conscience. I know that he's been fighting against the war against Syria for military as well as legal reasons. But whether or not it helped, I don't care. I think there's reason to believe this, that the top military who has been fighting against this, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the head of the Army, Navy, Air Force, and the Marines have been unanimous in saying this is a fool's errand, and they have not been shrinking away from saying that as they did before Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I think they told the President, look, we don't want to be on the hook for approving this kind of war. You ought to go to Congress. Maybe you can persuade Congress to authorize this war. But actually, Mr. President, if you read the Constitution recently, you should remember that to do otherwise than to consult Congress, or not consult, but get Congress's authorization, that's not quite right. That's not quite the Constitution that we swore to defend. Now, it's going to be really interesting to see if Congress buckles on this. I think what Obama is counting on is the Israel lobby, which is the most potent lobby group in Congress, which will lobby now for authorization for the war or for a strike, a military strike on Syria. So far, they have an impeccable record of success. This time, I don't know. This time, I think if the Israelis make it so patently clear that since they're the ones that will profit from continued slaughter in Syria and continued war Sunni against Shia, maybe if it becomes clear enough that it's not the interest of the Syrians or U.S. folks that will be killed, that maybe Congress will stand up. At least, and the good news today, of course, is at least Congress will have a chance now, and by extension, that means that we, as citizens of the United States, have a chance through our congressional representatives, senators and representatives, and we need to be in their offices in the morning of 9 September when they come back into office.
A lot of people, have theories about why, we go to war in the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, now Syria. A lot of people think it's about oil. It's not about oil, really, specifically from my point of view. It's about Middle Eastern oil collateralizing the petrodollar and our military power and projection collateralizing that. So we have a situation where we need to keep projecting our military prowess and power to keep our economy afloat. One mishap, in my opinion, I don't know, say a couple sunken aircraft carriers in this, situation, maybe Russia gets in and sinks a couple aircraft carriers. One misstep and perceived weakness, and I could see the dollar losing a tremendous amount of value. I mean, what do you think about what I just said?
Well, I think that you're right in terms of the currency being a very important factor here. But what I resist are people who say, it's all about oil, only oil, or people who say, it's all about Israel, only Israel, or people who say it's just about projecting our military strength. It's all three. And I've been saying now for, how long, 11 years, that, I use an acronym. Actually, Jon Stewart had a lot of fun with my acronym. It was OIL, okay? O for oil, I for Israel, and L for logistics, the military bases that's force projecting. It was all three sort of almost in equal proportion that, in my view, accounted for the attack on Iraq. Jon Stewart says, McGovern, you can't do that. Oil, you can't do that. That violates the rules for acronyms. You can't have OIL and then really mean oil. No, that's wrong. It was terrific because it gave all kinds of advertisement to this. Now, what am I really meaning here? I'm meaning that it's as much a felt need to deny others influence and protection of these kinds of places where there's oil deposits and not least gas deposits and also water sources. It's at least to deny, quote, the bad guys, whatever they are, including countries like Russia and China, from coming in and influencing events in a place like post-Saddam Iraq or Afghanistan. So, how do you do that? Well, the best defense is an offense, or however you say that. You try to have permanent military bases in Iraq. It was clear. That's what we wanted. Did we get it? No, we didn't get that. Did we get oil? Western oil companies are in there big as ever. So that sort of worked out. How about Israel? Well, this is a delicate matter, but, I'm an intelligence officer, not a politician. And the Israelis, of course, were very much aiding and abetting our war on Iraq. What for? Well, they thought that this fellow Chalabi, now, Ahmed Chalabi was their favorite son, and the favorite son of the neocons here in the Pentagon, in the State Department. He was a kind of a wealthy banker type Iraqi who pretended to have a great big following in Baghdad and in the rest of Iraq. Now, when I looked at his CV, looked at his bio, I found out that this guy was under indictment in Lebanon for embezzlement. Not only that, but how could he have such a big following in Iraq? Do you know when he left Iraq, Nathan? He left Iraq the same year that the Brooklyn Dodgers left Brooklyn for Los Angeles, for God's sake. What was that, 1958 or something like that? How could this guy... what he did, of course, he promised that he would recognize Israel and he'd give Western oil concessions and so forth. So we put our money on him, and he came in, and it's there's no secret about the fact that the Israelis were rooting for him. But when the Defense Department, kind of under the radar, brought him and about 200 of his people into Baghdad, it was a disaster because nobody really expected them to come in, and eventually he was indeed marginalized. So that was just one tangible indication of Israel's role in all this. When the fellow who ran the 9/11 Commission, his name will come to me in a second, when he was asked, he's a professor at the University of Virginia now. He was asked, what about the attack on Iraq? And he said, well, it's really impossible to say the real reason because no one likes to hear that Israel was one main factor behind this because this is a truth that cannot be spoken in polite circles in this country. Last thing I'll say is this, and this is the most telling in my view. Brent Scowcroft, who is National Security Advisor to President Ford as well as to others, President Bush, the first President Bush, he's sort of like elder statesman, still around, still writing. Okay, well, George Bush Jr. really felt that he couldn't completely diss this elder statesman, so he made him head of what used to be called the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. Now it's the President's Intelligence Advisory Board. They put domestic and foreign together. Anyhow, here's Brent Scowcroft watching what's going on. He writes an op-ed saying it's really crazy and foolish to attack Iraq. They do it anyway. And then he watches the motivation and he watches what's going on. And finally, he says, I've had enough. He goes to the Financial Times, a very prominent mainstream newspaper, and he says, you know what? I need to tell you that Ariel Sharon, at the time the Israeli prime minister, has our president, George W. Bush, wrapped around his little finger. He has him mesmerized. Quote, end quote. Now, why would Brent Scowcroft, very close friend of the first George Bush, head of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board until the following day, why would he go to the Financial Times and say, look, Ariel Sharon is running our policy. He's got the president wrapped around his little finger. He's got him mesmerized. I need the American people to know that. Now, did that get any play in U.S. media? No play at all. But he said it, and it was in the Financial Times. So what am I saying? I'm saying here that it's undeniable that Israel has more influence on U.S. policy, largely through their cultivation and financing of Congress, than any other single factor. And you don't need to look very farther than the campaign against Iran, which I hope your listeners know is a bogus campaign. When the New York Times and other newspapers and the White House say Iran's campaign to acquire a nuclear weapon, that, my friends, is an out-and-out lie. Why? Well, because all 16 U.S. intelligence agencies decided, quote, with high confidence, end quote, in November of 2007 that Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon in the fall of 2003 and has not resumed work on a nuclear weapon. Now, that judgment made in 2007 has been revalidated and reiterated every year by the head of our national intelligence. Okay, so the notion that Iran is a danger to Israel and much less to us is one manufactured in Tel Aviv, which, by the way, has about 200 nuclear warheads. So what am I saying? I'm simply saying that that's a real potent, a real graphic or tangible indicator of how the same people who were responsible for our attack on Iraq and were cheerled on by the New York Times are influenced by the Israel lobby. And, in the end, what's the definition of a neoconservative? It's a person who has great difficulty distinguishing between the interests of the United States on one hand and the interest of Israel on the other. Now that's not a I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong. I mean, people can think what they want, but it should be acknowledged that if you have dual loyalties like that, you shouldn't be making policy for one country, namely the United States of America.
I'm tired, Ray McGovern. I'm tired and I'm weary from war, nuclear weapons, this world war, Syria, and meanwhile, people are dying, lives, just so many millions of people's lives being destroyed. And I'm tired. I'm weary of it. We talk about it on the show on a regular basis, and it's nauseating. The corruption, yeah, you're right. They're not working in the best interest of the people. That hasn't happened. The bankers haven't been doing that for the last 70 years. It's been completely broken for a very long time. Our government doesn't act in the interest of its people. It's severed. It's broken. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing about it. I think being informative to the people is part of it. Letting them know about what's going on. Having guests like you on the show. But the people we're tired of it. We're nauseated.
Well, it's true. And actually, that's a positive factor in terms of preventing still more. What I read, what's happened over the last while here, and I'm talking just the last 3 days, okay? It looked very much like Obama had decided to start a war tonight, okay? Why? Because tonight, it's the beginning of the Labor Day weekend. Everybody's out, and he's not leaving Washington till Tuesday to go off to eventually to Russia for the big summit and so forth. So he gets these cruise missiles in there, and then he, pounds his chest and he leaves. Well, it didn't happen, and the reason it didn't happen is because of the opposition, not only among us peaceniks, not only among these activists that think that activism is the rent we pay for being on this planet, but in Congress and in our senior military. Now, let me give you some more hope here. It looked like about this time exactly this time. What is it, 31st of August? Okay. The 30th of August, 2012, this same General Dempsey got up in London at a time when it looked like Israel was going to strike Iran and expect us to pick up the pieces. It looked very much that way, okay? And now what did Dempsey do? He got up at a press conference and he said, and I quote, "I don't want to be complicit if the Israelis attack Iran." End quote. Whoa!
Right.
I mean, the guy's not a law professor. The guy's the head of our military, right? Now, Obama didn't have the guts to say that himself because of the Israel lobby. And I think that Dempsey did not do this on his own hook, but I'm sure that he pressed real hard and said, "Look, Mr. President, if you're not willing to say it this way so the Israelis call off this attack, at least let me say it." Obama said, all right, I'll say it. So what I'm offering is some hope that our military does not want to be involved in another feckless war, and that's exactly what it would be. And this is even more feckless. Well, it's hard to compare them, isn't it? Afghanistan and Iraq. Besides, we're not even prepared. Besides, even conservative senators like Imhoff in Oklahoma. Now, he's against it, strongly against it. Why? Because it will cost more money. Not that it'll kill a whole bunch of people, this whole sense of any contact with innocent suffering. He doesn't have that, but he's worried about the money. Well, okay, whatever he's worried about, if he's against the war, we have natural allies here that we can't believe. And I think this time we can prevent it. But it's going to require, and we have 2 weeks, well, not even 2 weeks, but 10 days to do it. But we get out there and we tell our representatives and our senators, we don't want another war. And if Congress does not authorize this war, I have serious doubts that the president will go ahead.
Ray McGovern, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. It's always enlightening, inspiring talking to you. You're a man of great knowledge, and we respect you here on the Black Tower Show. And we'd love to have you back on the show, and then we can talk about how all of these things have panned out.
Yeah, let me just say one more thing, if I can. Obama gets away with a lot of stuff because progressives, I know a lot of progressives, but they're reluctant to hold him accountable. And I have to say that a lot of my African-American friends also think he can do a little wrong. Well, he can do a hell of a lot wrong. And if we haven't owned up to that by now, as we have been encouraged to do by people like Cornel West, West has called him the mascot for Wall Street.
Sure.
Now, West doesn't say things lightly, but we ought to look really carefully. And I think if the black population, my friends downtown Washington, elsewhere, join together with progressives who are born again and realize what's going on, okay, that we have a good chance of turning this whole thing around. And I appreciate your letting me say that.
Take care, Ray McGovern. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye now.
Bye.